Mr. President. Mr. President, China voted against the draft resolution which has just been put to vote. This position is based on facts, based on law, and it is based on conscience and based on justice, and also based on the urgent cause of the entire world, in particular the Arab countries. We all recall that last Wednesday, a draft resolution focusing on the humanitarian situation in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, emphasizing the protection of civilians and supported by an overwhelming majority of Council members, failed to be adopted because of a veto. On Saturday evening, the U.S. introduced a new draft text that set aside the consensus of the members and included many elements that were still deeply divisive and that went far beyond the humanitarian realm. Several members, including China, Russia, UAE, and Brazil, proposed amendments to the text. However, the proponent ignored the major concerns of all parties and made only cosmetic changes to the draft. And it was printed in blue in order to push the Council to vote on it. In terms of its content, the draft is seriously out of balance and confuses right and wrong. In terms of the approach, the draft was introduced in haste and lacked the consensus it deserved. In terms of its effectiveness, the draft does not reflect the world's strongest cause for a ceasefire, an end to the fighting, and it does not help to resolve the issue based on the above. The draft text is evidently not in a position to be adopted. Mr. President, China in no way opposes Council taking action. On the contrary, we have always strongly called for the Council to play a responsible role. What we oppose is that the draft resolution is evasive on the most urgent issue of ending the fighting, and that it has never been able to call for an immediate ceasefire in clear and in unambiguous terms. At this moment, ceasefire is not only a diplomatic term, it means the life and death of many civilians. If a resolution from the Security Council is ambiguous on the issue of war and peace, it's irresponsible and it's also extremely dangerous. It's tantamount to paving the way for large-scale military action and giving the green light to further escalation of the war. China is by no means indifferent to acts that harm civilians. On the contrary, we strongly condemn at the first opportunity all violence and attacks against civilians and called for diplomatic efforts to promote the early release of the hostages. What we oppose is that the draft text does not call on the parties concerned to stop the indiscriminate and asymmetrical use of force, nor does it call for a thorough investigation into the heinous attack on the Al Ahli hospital. Such selective application of international law and double standards will only push more innocent civilians to the brink of death. China is by no means indifferent to the sufferings of the people in Gaza. On the contrary, we have always strongly called for the opening of relief corridors, ensuring humanitarian access and avoiding a humanitarian disaster. What we oppose is that the draft text selectively avoids referring to the root causes of the current humanitarian crisis in Gaza and fails to urge Israel to lift the full blockade of Gaza and to rescind the evacuation order for northern Gaza. Such an evasive approach will only accelerate Gaza's descent into an even greater humanitarian disaster. China is in no way denying Israel's security concerns. On the contrary, we have always strongly advocated that equal attention should be paid to the security concerns and legitimate rights of both Israel and Palestine. What we oppose is that the draft text attempt to establish a new narrative on the Palestinian-Israeli issue, ignoring the fact that the Palestinian territories have been occupied for a long time and avoiding evading the fundamental issue of independent statehood for the Palestinian people. It's worth being vigilant that the draft departs from the spirit of previous UN resolutions and embeds the dangerous logic of confrontation of civilizations and the justification of war and use of force. If the draft is adopted, it will completely dash the prospect for the realization of the two-state solution and plunge the Palestinian and Israeli peoples into a vicious cycle of hatred and confrontation. Based on the above, China will vote in favor of the draft resolution proposed by the Russian Federation. Mr. President, China has no selfish interest in on the question of Palestine. Any initiative that contributes to peace will receive China's staunch support. Any endeavor that facilitates Palestinian-Israeli reconciliation will be pursued by China with all-out efforts. Since the outbreak of the new round of conflict, China has actively advocated that the Council take meaningful action and make binding decisions on the Palestinian-Israeli situation as soon as possible. We also emphasize that the action and decisions of the Council must respect facts of history, take the right direction, and reflect due responsibilities and accountability so as to ensure that they stand the test of morality and conscience. We are ready to continue to work with members of the Council and the international community to play a constructive role in putting an end to the fighting, protect civilians, avert further humanitarian catastrophes, and realizing a comprehensive, just, and lasting solution to the question of Palestine. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the permanent representative of China for his